Welcome back, everyone, to our end of the year discussion on the best looking graphics of the year. Last year, I gave my opinion on this, but this year we've brought together these two fine gentlemen to join me on this discussion. So to my right, I have Richard Ledbetter.
Hello there.
And Alex Battaglia.
Hello.
And we've assembled a nice list of games here to discuss. We're going to go through each of these and discuss what we think about the games. And then once we've gone through the pros and cons of them, we're going to sort of present our own personal best of the year, or the most impressive, our favorite looking games of the year. So, gentlemen, let us begin with the first game on the list, which happens to be one of the most recent ones. And that's Red Dead Redemption 2. This is a game that I think had to be on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it's an astonishing project, which is essentially what would happen if you gave a really talented bunch of developers infinite money and as much time as they need to create the game that they wanted to create. And the technology on display here is really, really impressive. I mean, where do you begin? You know, animation, world building,
everything about it. The whole, like, they started from the ground up, you know, the material quality is phenomenal. There's a lot of excellent parallax occlusion maps everywhere in the game. The post-processing pipeline, the use of the Froxel fog everywhere.
It's kind of the culmination of this generation's techniques of graphical techniques. You have basically everything in the kitchen sink in that game, and I made a mention of it in the PC video that I kind of like theorizing what would a PC version do, and it was kind of like for normal rasterization techniques, it's top of the line as it is already. You could go a little bit further in some areas just by like cranking up the values, but for the most part, on Xbox One X is where I played it. It looks phenomenal. Just is a wonderful looking game, and surprising because I want to say GTA 5 and GTA 4 before it were not as impressive from like mainly rendering techniques perspective.
Yeah.
They weren't up to date necessarily, always that thing. They had the great world, but I feel like this one is on the graphic side, not just the simulation stuff. It's really great. And the prioritization on animation too is something, even though there's obviously ramifications for gameplay there.
Yeah, there's the input latency issue, which is one flaw.
Which is one flaw, obviously. Everything animates spectacularly.
Yeah, it just has such a visceral feel to it. Everything, the way everything works, the physics engine, they're using Euphoria again. Yeah, it's just a phenomenal looking game, and really the only gripe I think we could aim at it, it's the lack of proper HDR. Which is, you know, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I'm still not quite sure what's going on there, why they did that, because it is literally the SDR presentation mapped into HDR space. Exactly. So why? I mean, I don't understand, I don't get it. You know, on some of the lower end screens, it's going to look worse than the standard presentation. Which is kind of bizarre.
It is.
So yeah, and also, bearing in mind that they are extremely talented developers with an infinite amount of money and resources at hand, effectively, the PS4 Pro implementation was disappointing.
Yeah.
We still don't know the reason though.
No, I think it was they wanted to have that 2160p parity. Right. But their reconstruction technique combined with the way they did temporal anti-aliasing, there's a lot of temporal
Everything.
Yeah, everything in that game. It doesn't seem to work well together. The checkerboard doesn't resolve properly. It doesn't look great. So that's another blemish. But still, I think overall though, it's a very impressive game, and definitely one of the best of the year. So the next one then I want to talk about is an exclusive that comes to us from a very experienced developer with a long history of pushing visuals. I'm talking about Marvel's SpiderMan.
Wow.
Which from Insomniac Games. This is Insomniac's, I would say that this is probably the biggest AAA project that they've ever worked on. And they've developed their engine over the course of this generation, starting with games like Sunset Overdrive, moving on to Ratchet and Clank, that sort of reboot, remake thing that they did. This was the generation where they were able to really deliver a massive open world, like focus heavy on the post effects, and Spider-Man has all of this in spades, and it's just the fluidity of everything, the level of detail both in the macro and the micro sense, very impressive overall.
The open world was great.
And they to me they kind of solved one of my complaints with open world games is the traversal is often boring. But
Right,
in
of course.
Spider-Man, like moving through the world, just going from point to point itself was fun. So much fun right up to the end of the game.
I also want to praise their animation quality in general, just because, I mean, humans when mocapped look a certain way, but I feel like there's like a little bit of embellishment there to make them have that kind of hyper-real look. I don't know what it is. We talked about this before in the Overdrive video, but in combination with the extremely high-quality motion blur and the animations in the game, like when Spider-Man like does a jump in the air and punches someone in the face or something like that, it all just looks really great, and the camera swings too with it. It's one of my favorite looking games of the year by far.
Then there's their temporal upscaling, or what do they call it? Is that it?
Is it temporal injection?
Temporal injection, that's what it
Yeah.
is. Temporal injection, where
Yeah.
they're kind of running between 1512p, 1440p most of the time. But this technique, it delivers a final image that appears much cleaner than that, while also avoiding the artifacts of your typical checkerboard renderings. So you end up with a very temporally stable, very clean, almost CGI-like looking game. It's so nice looking in motion.
Yeah, it is remarkable to see that base resolution resolve so well on a 4K screen, and the materials in particular, you know, like Spider-Man's costume.
And we have to give a little bit of extra praise, I think, to the base PS4 version, because they pulled off a fantastic 1080p version of the game that looks and runs phenomenally well on
Also
Pro
using
systems.
not the reconstruction necessarily, we're not sure of that probably, but it's using dynamic resolution and hiding it well.
Yeah, it's exactly. So overall, it's one of the most fluid, beautiful open world games I've ever seen. Insomniac deserves a lot of credit for what they pulled off, and apparently they did it on schedule, pretty much. And like the working environment was great.
Yeah,
And
that's
it
a
seems
really
like,
important thing to point out.
Like the team just did a phenomenal job, and it was a good experience for those that worked on the game, from what I understand. And I think, you know, just the overall effort and the final result, it deserves a lot of credit. And also, it's one of the I don't finish a lot of open world games because I find them to become tedious over time. But Spider-Man, I pretty much platinumed.
Wow.
Like I just loved playing it so much. It's really a really addictive, beautiful game, and the presentation plays a huge role in that.
I really want to see that temporal jittering technique on more titles.
Which brings us to God of War from Sony Santa Monica. This was in development for quite some time, and I think the results are supremely interesting. It's a beautiful game with a lot of different locales that you visit, and one of the best examples of checkerboard rendering I've seen this generation. And it's the rendering techniques, I think it almost feels like they're not really pushing new boundaries in some of the ways that they're executing, but they're doing it in such a way that there's just such a high level of like detail on small objects. Like you look at the skin textures and the materials used on all the characters. It feels so gritty and richly detailed. Plus all the animation work and everything together and the seamlessness of everything. It's a top-notch effort from their studio.
Yeah.
I like the art design quite a lot. I mean, it's parallel to graphics discussion always,
exactly.
but I prefer the art design and the tone set by the graphics in comparison to the old games, which obviously had a much grander scope and view as you look at it as a whole, but kind of the intimacy of how close that camera is, I actually prefer it in this game.
Yeah. I think it's a massive comeback for Sony Santa Monica. God of War 3, honestly, the first time I saw God of War 3 on the PlayStation 3, I was thinking to myself, they somehow got some kind of PlayStation 4 hardware upgrade in this, because I hadn't seen...
It was really impressive.
There was this time where they were vying with Naughty Dog, you know, where each studio was pushing the other. And then Ascension came along, which is technically amazing, brilliant. But there's a sense that after that, the game didn't get the success that it might have deserved.
Yeah.
And the studio kind of lost track a bit. And it's just great to see the new God of War, not just sort of revitalizing the franchise, but also the studio.
But then I think after that, we have to talk about a very recent game, and one that Alex went into great detail on. Talking about Battlefield 5. Specifically, it's impressive across all platforms, but specifically I want to give a shout out to the amazing implementation of real-time ray tracing.
And people will probably maybe not agree necessarily. I can read comments. But it is a very important step in the future of real-time rendering in total, just to have that on screen in real time. I mean, depending upon the level of play you are on, obviously you may not notice these reflections, and not everyone has this hardware. Not everyone can afford this hardware, of course, but when it's there and it's running in real time in front of you and you see it in comparison to what we had before, just the nuances of things that you just never noticed. I didn't even think about the way windows looked in games before. You just run past them expecting them to look a certain way. And all of a sudden you run past and you realize you're in that window and it's like convolved and all cool looking. For me, that was very special. And seeing it at Gamescom, there were multiple moments of just putting my head at the desk almost for being so impressed with what I was seeing. But that's not the only thing.
Absolutely.
It's kind of a culmination of everything Frostbite has done this generation.
Yeah,
and for a while now, like pretty great baked lighting, like awesome effects and particle works, which is what kind of Frostbite does and has been doing like in Battlefront games for a while. And just really smooth animation and runs the gamut of every single effect you can think of, to like motion blur, depth of field being high quality, everything. And there's a slight gravitation when talking about like great graphics to focus on single player games and ones where you see a lot of cinematic third person animation.
Right, naturally.
And so multiplayer games kind of get left out, but here's one where I think when you're playing in multiplayer, you can get that semi-cinematic experience just by everything kind of coming at you. And it's a great game.
And I also want to tip my hat to the console versions as well. Mm-hmm. It is most impressive on PC, but they did a phenomenal job bringing it to the consoles. 60 frames per second gameplay. Always. It looks fantastic. It really is kind of like, it's just like everything that they've worked so hard on this generation implemented here in Battlefield 5. You look back at Battlefield 4 from launch and you compare it to what they've achieved here, and it's just, there's so much has changed and improved over time. It's an impressive achievement. So yeah, great stuff from DICE.
The level of detail that they're pulling out now, the GPU particle system, there's so many things, individual threads that you can pull out that just look amazing on Battlefield 5. Secondly, I think we need to give kudos to a developer that is not afraid to push PC.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Battlefield 5 on Xbox One X is kind of equivalent to the PC version running on medium settings. Yeah. And you're not just seeing iterative upgrades from high to ultra.
No.
You're seeing big upgrades. Yeah. There's a commitment here, not just to the PC platform, but to the future of graphics, which I think is remarkable.
I'm happy to see it.
The excitement and the passion that the graphics developers at Seed and DICE have for like just pushing the envelope.
Wonderful things. Frostbite is a golden child. Yeah.
Really amazing stuff. But I think it's time to talk about the next one, which is one that we had a debate about. So what do we think of this one? It's Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So this is the most recent, I guess it's the Anvil Next engine still here. This is Ubisoft's most recent open world extravaganza. They kind of rebooted the direction of the series with Assassin's Creed Origins previous year. And Odyssey is sort of like a step and a half forward, or more like a half step forward, I guess, from that game, visually speaking. And there's a lot that it does right. I mean, it still has that amazing sense of scale. I like the lighting. And a lot of the big lighting.
The clouds too. The clouds are wonderful.
The water is excellent. They sort of have that somewhat geometric water going on that I like a lot.
I just kind of feel like there's a little bit of a lack of polish.
Yeah, there's just enough jank there, and there's something I have to say it like that. But there's something about the animation. There's something about the skin shading and the way they render their characters.
Yeah. In a direct close-up, it looks great in like a cinematic when they have great control over the lighting. But in the overworld itself, other than looking at the surroundings, you look at your character, all of a sudden they kind of look a little bit plasticky.
Yeah, and just riding your horse around or like running around on foot, it always just feels a little off. There's something about it. So
that's where you can do the comparison with Red Dead, both of those things.
Yeah, exactly. So Odyssey, I think it's a technical accomplishment that they have such a beautiful open world, but there's still a lot of limitations there that hold it back from being, the top of the year, but I do think it deserves a mention on this video today because it is still an impressive accomplishment by Ubisoft.
But Ubisoft, if you want it to be in the top 10 and win, add some motion blur in there, man. It's been so many years.
I put Assassin's Creed Origins up there as one of my top of the year because it was such a massive step, especially from Syndicate. But I feel like it hasn't evolved that much, and in some ways I almost feel like there's some aspects of Odyssey that feel even slightly less impressive than Origins. Like it deserves a mention. It's an impressive game, but there's still some faults. So I'm curious to see where they go from here with that engine and that series. So
great HDR though.
Yeah, actually yes, it has fantastic HDR, and it's very adjustable. Allow you just the paper white and the luminance separately. So it's a really good benchmark title for that. But another one then, man, there's a lot of open world to talk about, but pushing the envelope, I guess that's how it goes. Forza Horizon 4. This one deserves some kudos for a variety of reasons, I think.
Excellent PC version, in spite of the platform it's launching on, which is a great thing to talk about.
Excellent versions is a major thing. Xbox One, Xbox One X, and PC, all superb, and they each take advantage of the hardware as you'd expect, even delivering a 60 frames per second mode on X if you're accepting a lower resolution. But really just the quality of their artwork, the direction, the materials quality, just the beauty of the world that they've created. It's such an achievement. It's really one of the most impressive looking racing games I've ever seen, I think.
And I think the push to make it more diverse seasonally also improves that, because I think like the previous Horizon before that, it was a little bit overly tropical all the time almost.
Yeah, it did.
Obviously the expansions helped that out, you know, like
Wheels was pretty neat.
Yeah, pretty fun stuff. But like the ability to see all these different things like coastline with beach, going into snow, which deforms into like the leaves of everything in fall. It was a gorgeous looking game, and top-notch motion blur, which I always want to praise.
These guys love to deliver consistent frame rates. Like they're pushing visual envelopes, but they always focus on delivering such fluid performance. It stays almost entirely locked, and that's really worthy of praise that they're able to balance that. The visual quality combined with the stability of the performance across every version, and also delivering a really high quality HDR experience as well.
PC version, I think the benchmark deserves a bit of praise.
Yeah, for being able to showcase every single thing on a graph, what's going on, as well as, you know, being able to test out what your system's doing and at an unlocked frame rate, which other Forza games before this didn't really support so well. I guess the only critique would be to make your options be able to tweet while the game's running, not having to restart the game. That's frustrating.
So, next up, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is another one that we debated on the inclusion because, along with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it is a beautiful game, I think, and it makes some smart changes to Rise of the Tomb Raider, which was also a beautiful game. And again, this is the engine developed in-house originally by Crystal Dynamics. They added some really great stuff to it. First of all, they added a temporal anti-aliasing to the mix,
needed,
which it really needed because Rise was just it was kind of, image quality was not its strong suit. A lot of specular shimmering, and that's all completely taken care of here.
And you also kind of have, you know, the greater I would say the art looks more consistent throughout. You talked about it in your original review there of Tomb Raider, John, that some of the materials looked a little bit like overly bright or not like the specular response was a bit weird. And here, I think on combination with the TAA and maybe a better materials pipeline or something like that, the game just looks more consistent throughout, and that lets some moments shine better. You know, like being in the jungle, like when, you know, Lara's there, it has this very Predator feel at times, and that's...
Yeah, it's just, you're right, the lighting and the artistry of the worlds that they've crafted is really phenomenal, and then it has a truly exceptional HDR mode, I think, especially in some of those later areas when you're inside the temples and caves and you see the sunlight pouring in from the ceilings, you know. It's so bright and intense versus the darkness inside. I really love the way it looks, but it has a couple flaws I think that's worth pointing out. It's the console performance. While mostly good, it's not quite where I'd like it. Like Xbox One X, for instance, there's some of the larger villages, you still get some slowdown and tearing where you wouldn't expect it. And the unlocked frame rate mode is still quite variable. and there's just a little bit of there's a little polish issues there here and there that detract a little from the experience.
On the other hand, though, I think the PC version deserves great praise for its performance, where it has one of the rare cases where DirectX 12 is better on every set of hardware you have, basically.
Oh, that's great.
And that's a rarity. Not every game has that, and that's not expected. It's not necessarily from the same studio at that point. That's a Nixus development effort.
These guys are great.
Adding in things like MSAA, which you don't expect in modern games at all.
Does
I like
it
that.
have MSAA?
It has a hidden MSAA option. Yeah, it does.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we have RTX, so obviously jury's out on the Shadow implementation.
We'll see what that's like.
But hopefully DLSS, I really hope they do that.
Pushing it out.
The next game, we're gonna group these together a little bit because we're talking about the state of CryEngine in 2018 with two games, The Hunt Showdown and Kingdom Come Deliverance, which are both gorgeous looking CryEngine games, but they each have their own pluses and minuses. Now, I've played Kingdom Come and I do think it's gorgeous. I haven't spent a lot of time with Hunt yet, but I'm very curious to check it out. So what you were really pushing for this one out?
I was pushing for Hunt specifically because I think, once again, there's a slight bias in these discussions always to not talk about multiplayer games.
You're right.
And multiplayer gaming on PC is huge. And then you look at a game that doesn't necessarily target the lowest end hardware. The Hunt targets pretty mid-range to upper high end, and it throws in everything that has come into CryEngine over the years, and which hasn't seen much use because, unfortunately, and for a number of reasons, CryEngine's not a middleware that people use. And so you get things like, voxelized global illumination in there, making like all these surfaces in games which otherwise look kind of gamey in darkness or in indirect lighting look really good and situated in the world. And it does things right that, it's a game that's slow paced. So if you're gonna fire a weapon, it's gotta feel and look great. And every single animation for the weapons and the hands in the game, really good. But the only problem is it's not played often and it's a multiplayer game. Yeah. So people won't ever talk about it. And I think it's right up there in terms of like most of the polish in the game is really wonderful. And it shows dedication. The audio experience is great.
I think the other thing about it is that it's pushing really high-end, possibly even next-gen level features.
Yeah, I mean,
which is interesting.
Which wouldn't work. The gameplay wouldn't really work without them.
Yeah, no, that the game without the global illumination, you couldn't see half of it half the time, and then the other half, I don't know if necessarily if it would work well on consoles to a certain degree, given like the kind of audience it's going for. So it's very particular. And to come to the other side, I think Kingdom Come Deliverance is also pushing a very similar high-end experience where the PC version looked pretty radically different than the console ones, significantly, but it has polish issues.
Feels somewhat buggy and stilted in spots, and there's just a lot of rough animation bits here and there, and the whole thing doesn't feel quite put together.
No, that's its main problem. Otherwise, I would put it right up there. If it had the amount of time and I guess dev experience that Red Dead had, it would also probably be a really wonderful experience.
I especially love the light spilling into interiors that you can enable on the PC. Or the forests. Very expensive.
I think the forests also look really wonderful in that game, like all the indirect light pouring in.
Now we're gonna kind of flip to a very different spot. I think this is worth discussing. So Wolfenstein II on the Switch. This was impressive for a number of reasons, and it's more impressive now than when we covered it even. So basically, I wasn't even confident that they could pull off the new Colossus.
I was dismissive. I thought it would be 20 FPS even. I thought, because I played the PC version, and I saw, wow, it's heavier on CPU and GPU.
Yeah, and the amount of geometry that they throw around, and just it's a huge step from Doom. And even id itself has kind of suggested it's like id Tech 6.5 or something in a way. Like there's a lot of changes made, but they managed to cram the entire game in there. Every stage is there. The complexity is not altered radically in any. There's a few little shortcuts taken, like they put a couple walls in spots where there weren't before to reduce the amount of draw that you need to do. But in general, it's an impressive achievement. And what's more impressive, I guess, is that, so I complained about a couple spots late in the game in New Orleans, for instance, huge frame drops into the low 20s. The resolution dipped to like, can't remember, it was very, like 360p, I think, even when docked. So it was pretty blurry and not smooth. But since then, they've patched it, and the performance is significantly better overall, and the minimum resolution seems to have been raised. I mean, they did a similar thing with Doom, but this one's almost more transformative.
Yeah.
So it just ends up looking and running a lot more consistently. Now, playing it on a large 4K screen, it's a very blurry game, but it's one of those ones, you see this running on a portable device like the Switch, this little tablet with such a limited power draw, and running and looking as it does while maintaining all the visual features. Like, I think the only things it's really missing have to do with like the water was downgraded in some ways.
SSR.
No SSR in the water, and like the below the surface, I think
There's no caustics.
no water caustics.
Wow,
But other than that, they kept the
volumetrics.
they kept the volumetric lighting. It's lower res, but it's there. So it's I think overall it's a really impressive conversion that goes beyond what I expected, and I think those guys really impressive studio.
And I can't wait to see what Doom Eternal looks like, because they're going to push that even further probably.
You're gonna keep going.
Let's just remember that SoC in mobile mode can't be putting more than 7 watts. 7 or 8 watts with the screen draw on top, but regardless, that is phenomenal. And let's remember, 2015 era silicon.
Yes, too. It's not using the best and the brightest from the time it came out.
You know, it is just astonishing. Just makes you wonder what mobile chipsets could do if they had the same low-level access.
Not tethered by Android.
Yeah, it's just astonishing.
Okay, so the next one that I want to talk about. This game isn't the most well-known, it seems, but I'm a big fan of it. I'm talking about Onrush. This was done by Codemasters, by a lot of the X-Evolution Studios guys that were responsible for MotorStorm. And this one really impressed me at the time because it's visually, when you see it running, it's pretty impressive. These large track environments with a lot of detail. There's parallax occlusion maps everywhere. There's some really nice just level of detail and geometry in every
Is there
stage.
like mud deformation
There's
as
mud
well?
deformation that actually, it looks phenomenal. And then they throw around just a huge number of vehicles. You have a lot of player cars, but then also the AI, sort of like the other AI controlled cars that are just like the mobs, I guess you could say, kind of running into them and everything. And seeing all that running at 60 frames per second so consistently on the consoles, at least on the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, it really impressed me a lot. And it's a blast to play. It's very responsive. They have very low input latency. I think there's a lot to be said for a game that can deliver such fluid performance while looking as it does. I mean, talking to those guys, like the vehicle models, they're maybe like 20% fewer polygons in general in each vehicle model compared to Drive Club. But there's so many more of these vehicles. And that's of course like Lot Zero, right? You know, they're going to use a level of detail system, and Drive Club does as well. But the models themselves are very detailed, independent suspension, every piece of the car modeled fully out, you know, the physics applied to it. It just looks really impressive.
I don't think we saw the majority of the engine's features really showcased. So everything is dynamic.
Yeah, that was the main thing, right? The engine, everything was dynamic. The lighting, everything. You could change the time of day just like that. They were showing me builds running in real time, just moving the sun and the moon around, and just watching all the shadows change. And
That's awesome.
the clouds, it's a fully volumetric cloud system, volumetric lighting everywhere. Like, it was such an advanced engine, and they were doing it all at such a high frame rate. And it's true though, the game looks great, but it almost doesn't show it off as well as it could. Some of those nighttime tracks, when it goes from like night to morning and they get the rain effects and all the volumetrics hitting, that looks phenomenal. But otherwise, you know, so yeah, I can see why it was overlooked, but I think it's a really cool game, and if you guys haven't played it, it's still worth checking out. It's really a cool title. There's 2 more on our list.
Okay.
Next one, another first-party game from Sony, Detroit Become Human. So say what you will about the game itself, I kind of enjoyed the experience of playing it. The guys at Quantic Dream did a phenomenal job with their in-house engine and just the rendering techniques, because they focus on a different sense of scale. Like, this is a smaller scale game, a lot of densely packed small environments that you explore, and it just focuses on like the smallest details and also the close-ups of each character.
That's the big praise I want to say in comparison to their previous games, where I mean, they were famous for putting out that demo before the PS3 came out, basically showing like, this is what we're going to get on this generation of hardware. And that blew minds back and then. You go back now and you're like, ooh, it's got that uncanny valley bit. It's like very weird looking. But this is the first time I think they kind of crossed the border into a realm where you're looking at these human faces and they're emoting. You don't feel uncomfortable, you don't feel like it's wrong. It's actually, and some wonderful acting performances as well from the variety of characters in the game. And it's all brought out really well with these like awesome face rigs that just capture it.
Yeah, it's really great. And then even the scenery itself is also wonderful. The lighting and the artistry there. There's that scene where you wake up in the junkyard in the rain and you're all glitching out and just like seeing like all those moving like cyborg bodies and arms everywhere with like the huge puddles of rain and just, you know, the drops flying and the particles all over. Really atmospheric and just beautiful to behold.
I think one thing that stood out to me was how similar the base PS4 and the Pro versions were.
That as well, yeah. The Pro version was 4K checkerboard, so it was very sharp, but the PS4 version, 1080p, also beautiful. They both looked basically identical, and it was just, as far as like cinematic looking worlds go and like cutscenes, I think it's one of the best we've seen this generation. And then lastly, this is one that came out very early in the year, but it's still one that impresses me a lot, and it's the Shadow of the Colossus remake. It's running on Bluepoint's in-house engine, but it also has the code from the original game running below the surface, so the actual game code is still there, so it plays very accurately to the original. But the world size, like the quality of the rendering on display, you have this massive world with this full volumetrics everywhere, really nice motion blur, great material work, and it all can run at 60 frames per second on the PS4 Pro.
Yeah, right.
And it's very stable 60 frames per second too, which this is great because the original Shadow of the Colossus on PS2, while a technical achievement, was notorious for its obscenely low frame rate.
Praise there needs to be done for, because it's really easy to update a game or improve its graphics by altering the artist's vision. You can see that in texture mods on PC really often. But this game, it just looks like your mind's eye thought the way I think Shadow of the Colossus.
Said that they didn't love that look, but I don't agree at all. I think they really captured the look and feel of that world brilliantly, and I think it looks better than it ever did. And it just, the atmosphere and the feeling of exploring that lonely environment. I love what Bluepoint does with their in-house technology. These guys are phenomenal. But I think that's pretty much that's our list for now. So I think the difficult thing here then is for each of us to kind of select what we feel is our favorite example of impressive tech, and I guess you can combine the art with it as well. Like the holistic view, what we think is the most beautiful, stunning game of the year.
Okay, I'm gonna say it. It's Battlefield 5 for me.
In RTX.
In RTX mode, because I feel when you make that sacrifice for resolution and I guess frame rate targets, depending upon what you're targeting, you're looking at something that we haven't seen before in games. There's been, attempts to kind of trace parts of the scene before in games. They always fail. They always break down for some reason. I guess kind of when you look at them on the ultra setting, especially, which represents what we're going to be seeing in the future as time goes on. And this is just about one ray traced effect. What happens when you have all of these together in a game? It just represents what we're going to be seeing in the future. And for me, in combination with everything else they did in that game, which represents what we've seen from Frostbite this generation so far, at the top level, it's super awesome looking. It just looks wonderful. I love that game.
You're not wrong. It's a gorgeous game.
But also Red Dead looks really great too.
I do have to go with Red Dead Redemption 2 because it's just everything that they've done together, like the big picture stuff, especially on Xbox One X, like seeing a game like that with that quality on every front, like everything about it is phenomenal. Like it just, when you're wandering through Saint Denis at night and there's all those there's Froxel fog volumes everywhere and the lights,
shadows.
There's lights with shadows everywhere. There's all the parallax occlusion maps. You're leaving like the decals as you walk around. And just the quality of the materials work and just the complexity of the structures and all the animation work happening around you and just the way everything interacts and moves and especially on Xbox One X, just how stable it is. Like doing all that at 4K and locking at 30 most of the time, and just being such a seamless world with so many different places to explore. Like when you're out in the open plains versus when you're like in a dense forest versus when you're in the city,
or when you're in the mountaintop,
or when you're in the mountaintop, or you're in the bayou, or you're in the snow. Like every place looks so unique and so beautiful, and I mean, they really answered the question, what do you get when you just have like infinite budget with incredibly talented developers and like
who worked very hard on the game, obviously,
Yeah,
you know,
like,
to their own detriment. Yeah.
for this year, I have to hand it to them. It just blew me away in terms of what they achieved, more than I expected, honestly.
I agree with both of you. Let's go for a drink. No. This is a difficult one. Spider-Man for me is the game that I'm most connected with out of all of that. I just think it's using graphics and technology just to produce an A1 experience that just feels and looks amazing. Feels amazing and looks amazing. And Red Dead is more technologically advanced, and in many ways it's even more of an achievement because all 4 versions of that game are effectively the same, which is an incredible achievement.
Yep.
You know, even, you know, okay, so the Xbox One S version is a little bit blurry, but it's still doing everything.
Fundamentally, it's all there.
It's all there. So, you know, in that respect, you know, it is absolutely phenomenal. But Spider-Man, I just think that everything comes together. It's just an awesome experience. But again, you know, I just can't make up my mind on this because Battlefield 5, the evolution, you know, the story isn't just that one game.
No.
It's the evolution it's the evolution, the culmination of a console generation's worth of development, where the developer hasn't just operated within the constraints of the consoles.
Yeah, that's true.
They've pushed further. They've embraced all these new technologies. They've, you know, embarked on a program of improvement that's, you know, just seen some phenomenal advances in physically based rendering, HDR, now ray tracing, and they want to push PC hardware beyond doing more than just resolution and frame rate.
Yeah, it's true.
So, you know, this is what makes it really difficult. This is why we haven't actually ranked all of these.
But I will say, based on everything we just said here in the last bit, I think it's fair to say that our top 3, in no particular order, is Red Dead, Battlefield 5, and Spider-Man.
Okay, well, I guess we should wrap this one
wrap
up
this
then.
one
So
up.
yeah, really hope you enjoyed the video. As always, please do like and subscribe to support everything we do here at Digital Foundry. And yes, a small icon will be flashing up. It's the ring the notification bell. You'll get instant notifications whenever a new Digital Foundry video appears on the channel. So yes, do please select that. But that's all from us for now. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.
See you next year.
Tschüss.